humble about presuming to give you any kind of advice or suggestions. I was asked to talk really about what the relevance of the smarter cities thinking might be to Christchurch. In the last couple of years, I've spent a fair amount of time looking at the earthquake and tsunami in Concepcion, the earthquake and tsunami in Sendai. In fact, I will not talk about those because I think that in some ways they're very different from the experiences in Christchurch, and I think it would also be too presumptive for me to talk about those things to this audience. So what I'm thinking to do is to talk about, so what are some of the concepts, the thoughts behind smarter cities, which certainly for IBM goes back about 4 or 5 years. It's a concept, it goes back much further. Give you an example of a particular city that suffered a different kind of disaster. It suffered, in fact, an economic disaster, and yet is showing how a city can recover beautifully from even such a crisis. And then some closing thoughts on some techniques that I've seen in the last few months that I think may be relevant to the conversations that you're beginning to have here. So to talk about cities for a moment here. Probably most of you know the statistic of half the world's population since 2007 now living in cities, and expectation that by mid-century we will have more than 70% of the world's population living in cities. Going forward, human society is going to be primarily in cities. We might expect it eventually to reach 90–95% even over time. What was surprising to me is that New Zealand itself is one of the most highly urbanized countries in the world. And I think of New Zealand, obviously the first thing I think of is sheep and rural communities. But you're not. You're actually very concentrated in the small number of large-ish urban areas. And so you are a model, in fact, for the rest of the world in many ways here. Why is that important? Well, one reason it's important is that cities account for the majority of energy consumption. Same with water. So if we are going to address the resource stresses that we can see coming in the mid-century, we're going to have to do that in cities. Secondly, this is also then one of the ways to address much of greenhouse gas emissions. It's also one of the major activities of the next 40–50 years for much of the planet is building cities for the other 6 billion people or so who will be with us by mid-century. A phenomenal amount of investment, phenomenal complexity. But given that we also expect the world population to decline from that peak, the cities that we build in the next 40–50 years will last a long time. They are, for the next couple of hundred years probably, going to be the structure of the human race here. And lastly, one of the critical resources that we can see to be addressed here is water. Now, you are abundantly provided with water, and I've been experiencing that since I arrived in Auckland on Monday. So you'd be grateful for that. But nonetheless, this is an area that needs a great deal of thought. So this is a focus for many organizations around the world to be thinking about, and it's one of the areas that drew IBM's attention 4 or 5 years ago when we were starting to think of our Smarter Planet initiative. But we were also drawn naturally because of technological evolution. At that time I was doing a study. Study was called Life on an Instrumented Planet, and the thing that we were looking at there was the fact that there are many instruments today that provide in a digital format information about what is going on in the world. So some of those are environmental sensors, there are energy consumption sensors, water meters. And then in the last 4 or 5 years, of course, we've seen this huge growth in human sensors, so people as sensors through social media, which reveals evidence of trends that are going on in the city, and in fact is increasingly being used by many cities to try and understand what their citizens are thinking and what the citizens' goals in life are. So the sources of information about the physical world have grown enormously in just the last 10 years, and with the deployment of global internet and wireless networks and fiber optic cables in urban areas, we have huge connectivity to that and the ability now to capture that data. And at that top layer there, the digital world, to apply that now to be analyzed and gain insights from it. I'm going to show you in a moment a large number of areas where we applied essentially this model of capturing information from the physical world, connecting it to a platform where in more or less real time we can perform quite complex analysis on it and produce insights. But just to give you a sort of concrete example of this from Auckland, this is the, we might call it the smart bus system of Auckland, where the bus itself is the intelligent sensor. Using a GPS device, we can track the movement of the bus. So it's interesting to know where the buses are. The bus is also in some ways a proxy for the movement of traffic as a whole. So it's a proxy, tells us how fast traffic in general is moving. But in particular system that was implemented here, it enables the transit agency now to give very accurate predictions of when the bus is going to arrive at a particular bus stop. And so I see here in Christchurch, as I recall, also electronic signs that tell you when the bus is going to arrive. And the top level there, the live departure board, is a smartphone app that tells the individual traveler when his or her bus is going to arrive. So this is an example of going from the physical world up to the digital world and providing valuable insights. This is a relatively simple example, but it's quite a popular one. We've seen this in many places around the world. So abstracting from that, because we love to abstract, is this, we call it the 3 I's. The world is becoming instrumented, is becoming interconnected. We can capture that data, but we can also unify it in a common data model, and then we can apply intelligence to it, machine intelligence at least, let's say. So here's our menu of just a few of the kinds of areas of smart that we've been involved in the last several years. Starting with intelligent transportation systems there, the traffic information management is that bus example, or at least it's a part of that traffic information. Very popular for helping travelers navigate through cities. We run a pilot at the moment in the San Francisco Bay Area, where if you opt in to a service, it will track your mobile, your smart telephone, to observe for a period of time what are the common journeys that you make. And then going forward, as you set out in the morning or the evening on a particular journey, it will give you a personalized recommendation of what's the best way to make that journey today. And that might be, if you're a driver, what are the best roads to use, how to avoid congestion, or if you're a public transportation user, what's the best combination of buses and metro and trains to make that journey, which may be different tomorrow. It's also, from the point of view of the transit agencies, an interesting way of enabling a certain amount of load management across the different roads, different services as well. In energy management, a great deal of work there on smart grids, smart meters. Smart meters clearly initially as a way of being able to do the meter reading automatically, but increasingly then as a way of enabling a dialogue now between the building, the residents, and the utility company that enables smoothing of the demand, enables optimum use of the generating capacity that's available at any given moment. It takes us somewhat into the building management area. Buildings, one of the major sources of energy consumption around the world. Huge interest in improving the energy efficiency of buildings. Architects have developed wonderful capabilities. I should say architects and engineers developed wonderful capabilities and materials in the last years to design buildings that are intrinsically energy efficient. But I would observe to you, this is like going to buy a car, and you go into the car showroom and there's a sticker on the car, I assume, that tells you this car consumes 6 liters per 100 kilometers, or this car consumes 10 liters per 100 kilometers. And that is a number that has come as a result of the manufacturer's testing. However, at least in the United States at one time, there was a little rider down the bottom that said, your mileage may vary. It's the same with buildings. You can design a very energy efficient building, but what you get out of that will depend on how you manage that building. And that's one of the smart areas, if you like, that we're interested in here. Well, I could talk about these for a long, long time. And they're only a part of the portfolio. When we started to talk about this, which is about 4 years ago now, I think, broadly, we were actually astonished at the level of interest that it generated. We were just inundated by requests from cities around the world to learn more about this before we'd really articulated what the value propositions are. And you know, as you probably gathered from the few examples I gave you, the value propositions are generally about improving the efficiency of urban infrastructures, whether that is energy efficiency or in terms of the loss of water in water distribution systems, or the efficiency, the effectiveness of transportation systems. It turned out, however, that wasn't the thing that was driving the interest that we were seeing. It took us a long time to understand this, but what drives that interest is, in fact, economic development. That cities around the world see this approach, among others, as a way that they need to differentiate themselves, that they need to make themselves attractive, particularly for Generation Y, Generation X, the internet natives who expect to interact with the world through some digital interface. And the idea of going to a government office and filling in a paper form just seems, you know, somehow abnormal. So that continues to be one of the major things that drives interest here. So let me give you this example then about a city. Anybody heard of Dubuque, Iowa? One person, two people, one. So Dubuque is a very small city. It's about 60,000 people. And it's on the Mississippi. And a century ago, it was a very rich city. It was a more important city in those days than Detroit, which is not too far away. And it was important because it was the major center in the United States at that time for machining wood. There were forests further up north in Michigan that were harvested. The logs would be floated downstream, brought ashore, and machined into doors, windows, staircases, furniture, anything that needed something more than a simple plank of wood. And the city was basically built around that. And you can see how affluent it was from the beautiful architectures of the late 19th century, early 20th century buildings. That industry died about 30 years ago. It does not exist. So this is the economic disaster. Here's a city that basically lost its identity, lost its soul. It called itself the city that machines wood, but it doesn't machine wood anymore. So what is its identity? And it's a little bit like death of a spouse. There's a long period of denial that sets in that says, you know, that spouse really is going to come back. And for 10, 20 years, the city argued, oh, that industry will come back. But after 20 years, they eventually had to admit, well, it probably isn't going to come back. So what is our future? What are we going to be known for in the future? That was about, so that period was roughly around year 2000. And a wonderful thing happened, which is one of the things that I would love to commend to Christchurch, is that the community, and admittedly this is a smaller city than Christchurch, came together and decided the two major principles for their future, their narrative that they would develop about the city, were going to be their Midwest heritage, their architectural heritage, cultural heritage at that time, and a focus on sustainability. Now, I'm not saying that Christchurch should adopt the same principles, but the fact was these are the two principles that the city adopted. And adopted them in such a way that despite significant political differences and socioeconomical differences within the community came together around this idea. They elected a mayor, 2005, on that kind of platform. The mayor was re-elected about 2 years ago on the same platform. And this has had a dramatic effect.